way tariffs were sold is that it's going to make America great again. It's going to make us rich, is what Donald Trump said. Because theoretically, the way it works is you put up these tariffs with our trading partners, and it makes their goods less desirable to the American consumer. And therefore, you increase demand for domestic products. And then also, as an entrepreneur, you see demand increasing for domestic products. So you start producing more domestic products. And that's how we not only are able to create more tax revenue through these tariffs, we're also able to bring manufacturing back, all these high-paying jobs, et cetera, et cetera. This is how it works in theory. Now, in practice, it doesn't work that way, but that's the way it's sold. So the fact Donald Trump came out and implemented these tariffs, I think on Saturday, and then just a couple days later paused them for a month, it's kind of a head scratcher. Because if these tariffs are going to make us so rich and create all these high-paying manufacturing jobs, why are we pausing? Why don't we want that right now? My point here is that I think Donald Trump himself knows that the tariffs don't make us rich, they make us poorer in practice. And he's using this as a negotiating tactic. At least I hope he is. Because if you look at all the things, just go through your local Home Depot, just go through your local Walmart or your local Target and ask yourself what percentage of those goods are produced overseas. And then ask yourself, do we have the capacity to produce those within the United States? Do we even have the workers that want to get that manufacturing job? You know, I have someone that works for me. His name is Josh. He's 22 years old. So he really has his finger on the pulse of kind of the intentions or the goals of that. I think that's Gen Z, right? So he's really, that's all of his buddies and all the people that he hangs out with. They're all Gen Z. So he knows what their objectives are. And I asked him, I said, how many of your friends aspire to have a manufacturing job where they are working in a widget factory on some sort of assembly line? And he said 0. I said, oh, wow, that's surprising. And how many of your people that you hang out with want to create content, want to be a YouTuber, want to be on Instagram, want to do something with social media, or want to do something on the internet, even if it's not creating content? Well, every single one of them. So you see that when the rubber meets the road, it's not as easy as just putting up a tariff and then all of a sudden we're going to be making all these shoes, we're going to be making all of these goods here in the United States. I was listening to my good buddy Peter Schiff, and he brought up avocados. And just as an example of that, that's probably not something that you're going to make in the United, maybe in California, you could grow them there, but you're only able to grow that in certain areas. And therefore we have to understand that this is going to reduce the amount of goods and services we have access to. So the comeback there is, or the rebuttal is always, yeah, George, I see what you're saying, but it's going to increase the wages of American workers, because now, even if we're not producing as much stuff, we're producing more stuff here in the United States, and that is going to trickle down to the American worker, and they're going to have a lot more purchasing power. I think this really puts the cart before the horse, because in economics, one of the most counterintuitive thing, it's so hard for people to get their head around, is that income is not purchasing power. Gold is not purchasing power. Silver, Bitcoin, dollars. It's not true wealth, in other words. True wealth is access to goods and services. Because if you're stranded on a deserted island with a chest full of $1 billion, but all you have are a couple coconuts and some salt water, are you rich or are you poor? You are poor. Why? Because you don't have any stuff. You don't have access to stuff. So when we're trying to think through tariffs, and I absolutely agree that there are trade-offs. This is a cost-benefit analysis. And in a cost-benefit analysis, you do have benefits to tariffs. The question is, on net balance, do the benefits outweigh the costs, or do the costs outweigh the benefits, right? And when we're thinking through a proper analysis like that, what we have to do is we have to start by asking ourselves, does this increase the amount of goods and services we have? See, what most people do, their starting point is, well, does this increase American wages? And if this increases American wages, well, then it's great. No, it's not. Because if you just increase wages, but you decrease the amount of stuff, well, what's going to happen? The purchasing power isn't going to go up. Those prices are going to go up. And to a point where the margins shrink for the producers in the United States, and then they're going to have to start laying off workers, and that doesn't increase purchasing power. So there is no net benefit to the American worker unless you're creating an environment, a society that has access to more goods and services. So when we're thinking through tariffs, with Canada, Mexico, China, wherever these tariffs are targeted, we just have to start by asking that question. Is this going to result in the short term, midterm, long term with us having more goods and services or less? And usually, if you're being honest about it, the answer is obviously less, even if you have some of those goods produced in the United States. So that's why I really hope that Trump is just using these as a negotiating tactic. Donald Trump, I think, has done some amazing things, but the fact of the matter is he's a bull in a china shop. That's one of his superpowers. That's one of the reasons why he's such a good negotiator. But I have no idea what he's going to do because he's constantly contradicting himself. I mean, just the other day, he came out and he said that through a tweet, he's threatening all of these countries that are potentially going to use the BRICS currency. He said that they better not do that or else they're going to get like a 100% tariff. Right. And while at the exact same time, he is telling everyone that he's a huge proponent of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. It's like, how do you square that circle? Because you're threatening people who are jeopardizing the future of a monetary system that's dominated by the US dollar. But yet, on the same hand, you're trying to empower people that are building products that are intended to threaten the dollar. You're threatening people to don't stop using the dollar, I assume, because you don't want the dollar to go down in value relative to other currencies, but you don't want the currency to collapse. But at the same token, you want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, which a lower currency would be a tailwind. So it's kind of like a push-pull. If you have higher currency, then that's going to be a headwind for manufacturers that would likely offset any tailwind that was created by a tariff. So again, I'm just going on based on what he's saying. And every single time I listen to him, he's contradicting something that he said like 5 minutes ago. I can't remember a time when there were more unknowns than maybe March of 2020, for obvious reasons, back then. But today there are almost as many unknowns. And with the exception of, we'll call it the cerveza sickness, I think we're at an all-time high, at least since I've been creating content or even been thinking about this stuff back in 2012. Most likely it's going to be volatile. I mean, we can see in the market today, it was down, I think 600 points to open. And then when he came out and he took back the tariffs and he pressed the pause button for a month, now all of a sudden the market's down maybe 200, maybe it's flat. Who knows, it might close up. So I think that what most investors should factor into the equation is that 2025, whether we end the year higher or lower with specific asset prices, it's most likely going to be far more volatile than what we have seen over the past couple of years. I think the priority should be deregulation and reducing bureaucracy and red tape. That should be priority number one. Because without that, let's just assume that the tariffs do give a competitive advantage to U.S. manufacturing. Unless you reduce regulation, unless you reduce the bureaucracy, it's not going to matter, right? It's just like you could go down to Argentina's a great example, right? Prior to Milei, they had so many rules and regulations that you just couldn't produce anything, even if you did have some sort of competitive advantage from the currency being weak or a tariff or something like that. So it's got to start with getting rid of the regulations. A lot of people focus on lowering the debt. And although, sure, that would be nice, I want to reduce government spending, that's for sure. But my main objective is that we reduce government spending as a percentage of GDP. That's what's most important. And not necessarily because foreigners won't buy our bonds or treasuries. I don't think that's an issue at all, especially when you look at interest rates right now. But more importantly, if we can get government spending as a percentage of GDP down, that tells us that the economy is going to be more and more efficient. Well, if it is true that wealth is about how many goods and services an economy can create, then if you reduce government spending as a percent of GDP, increase efficiency of the economy, then by definition, you're going to be increasing the amount of goods and services that economy is producing. And so for me, that's where everything starts. And all of the tariffs and this, and that, it's all just kind of a sideshow. And the efficacy all is from an economic standpoint. Now, it may be effective in reducing the cartels, and that's a separate topic. But just looking at this through an economic lens, the efficacy of any of these policies revolves around that one thing. It's very funny because at the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, I wasn't successful at all. Every business I started lost money, but I started making money in the early 2000s. And one of the reasons why is because I realized that with this current business, there are all of these moving parts. You had marketing, you had the sales, you had hiring and training salespeople, you had customer satisfaction, you had all of these things, right? And you were just spreading yourself so thin that you couldn't improve on anything. It was just kind of a slow grind down. And I think there's a book that really focuses on this idea. I said, George, what's the one thing that matters? And for me at the time, it was just generating leads. I'm like, because if I generate more leads, then that's going to result in more sales. Even if I'm not able to train the salespeople as well as I should, even if I don't have the best salespeople, it doesn't matter if I increase the amount of leads that are coming in at, let's just say, the top of the funnel, to put it in digital marketing terms. And so I thought about it and I'm like, customer service, that takes care of itself, because now I'm going to have plenty of money to spend on individualized, like white glove service to the people that are signing up for my product. And so you just go down the list of things, and what it boils down to is more leads solves all problems. So that was the one thing. If I was Trump right now, I would look at the economy the exact same way. I would say, what's the one thing? And the one thing, like I just said, is reducing regulations, reducing bureaucracy, reducing red tape. That matters even more than taxes. In fact, I read a study the other day of, it was like 500 CEOs across the United States, and they were asked the question, would they prefer lower regulations or lower taxes? And like 99% of them said lower regulations. And so hopefully the tariffs improve the drugs coming in and the cartels and all those things. But I think at the end of the day, from an economic standpoint, hopefully he just uses them as a negotiating tactic.